The auctioneer's gavel came down at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning in Columbia, Tennessee, and 180 acres of Maury County farmland changed hands for $412,000. Preston Caldwell smiled. He was 34 years old, wore a charcoal suit from a tailor in Nashville, and had just closed the fastest agricultural foreclosure of his career. He turned to the reporter from the Daily Herald and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Sometimes the old men just have to learn. The world moves on whether they want it to or not." In the back row, a 74-year-old man in a faded blue work shirt stood up, adjusted his suspenders, and walked out without a word. 3 days later, Preston Caldwell sat in a wood-paneled courtroom 2 blocks away and could not bring himself to meet the judge's eyes. Behind him, the reporter was writing again, but this time the headline would not be the one he expected. Because Harold Whitaker had not come to the auction to stop it. He had come to watch it happen. He had known since 1972 that it could not stand. And what he carried in the inside pocket of that faded blue work shirt was about to turn $412,000 of bank money into the most expensive mistake Meridian Capital Partners had ever made. Harold Whitaker was 74 years old. He lived on 180 acres of land 6 miles outside Columbia, Tennessee, on a road that still wasn't paved all the way to his gate. His father, Earl Whitaker, had bought the land in 1952 and died on it in 1971. Harold inherited it the following spring, the same week he came home from the foundry in Nashville and hung up his factory boots for good. He had lived on that land for 54 years. He drove a 1989 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a bed liner rusted through in 2 places. He wore the same pair of red wing boots for 9 years before replacing them, and when he did, he kept the old ones in the mudroom because, as he told his daughter once, throwing out good leather is a kind of sin. In Columbia, people knew him. They knew he paid cash at the feed store and never asked for credit. They knew he had loaned out his tractor to the Meeks family for 2 seasons after Dale Meeks broke his back and never mentioned it after. They knew that when the Baptist church needed a new roof in 2009, Harold wrote a check for $11,000 and made them promise not to put his name on the plaque. He was not a talkative man. He was the kind of man who, when asked a question, would chew on the inside of his cheek for 4 or 5 seconds before answering. For 53 years, Harold Whitaker had performed one small ritual that nobody in Columbia knew about. Every January, on the 3rd Monday of the month, he drove into town, walked into Riverbend Community Bank, and paid a $47 fee to maintain something called a preservation certificate, tied to the original 1972 mortgage his father had taken out on the land. He paid it in cash. He got a receipt. He filed that receipt in a green metal box on the top shelf of the hall closet, next to 52 other receipts going back to 1972. He had never missed a January. Not the January his wife, Lorraine, died in 2003. Not the January he had pneumonia in 2011 and had to walk into the bank leaning on a cane. Not the January the ice storm shut down half the county in 2015 and he drove 31 miles on a chain-fitted truck to make it before closing. He did not know precisely what the preservation certificate did. He only knew what his father had told him, sitting on the porch in the last autumn before Earl Whitaker died. "You pay the $47, son, every year, even if they tell you don't have to, even if they tell you it doesn't mean anything, you pay it and you keep the paper, because someday somebody's going to come for this land, and when they do, that paper is going to stand between you and ruin." Harold had been 20 years old that autumn. He had not understood, but he had promised, and for 53 Januaries he had kept that promise. In March of 2024, Riverbend Community Bank was bought out by Meridian Capital Partners, an investment firm headquartered in a glass tower on West End Avenue in Nashville. The sign on the brick building in Columbia did not change right away, but the people inside began to change within a month. Preston Caldwell arrived in June. He was 34 years old, a Vanderbilt MBA with a law degree from Emory, and he had been hired by Meridian specifically to modernize the loan portfolio across 4 rural counties. He wore charcoal suits and Italian shoes and drove a black BMW that did not belong on Maury County back roads. He kept his hair cut every 11 days. He smiled with perfect teeth. The older tellers at Riverbend, the ones who had known Harold Whitaker for 30 years, did not like him. But no one asked their opinion anymore. The first week of September, Preston Caldwell sat down at his new desk and pulled up the mortgage file for one Harold E. Whitaker, age 74, of Route 3, Columbia, Tennessee. The file was old. It had been digitized from paper sometime in 2008, and the outstanding principal after 52 years of payments was $8,962. $8,900 on 180 acres of prime Middle Tennessee farmland appraised at $470,000. Preston smiled. There was a payment irregularity flagged in the system, a single missed payment from August, the month Harold had been in the hospital with a kidney stone. It had been made the following month, late by 19 days, with a fee. Under the old Riverbend policies, that was the end of it. Under Meridian's new aggressive acceleration clause, it was the beginning of something else entirely. Preston drafted a default notice that afternoon. He called Harold himself a week later to deliver the news in person. He wanted to see the old man's face. He had found in his short career that there was a particular satisfaction in watching rural borrowers understand that the bank they had trusted for 3 generations no longer existed. Harold came in on a Wednesday. He sat across the desk in his work shirt and his clean boots and his suspenders, and he listened while Preston Caldwell, age 34, explained that the mortgage was now in acceleration, that the full balance, the $8,900, was due within 30 days, and that failure to pay would trigger foreclosure proceedings under Tennessee statute. Harold said nothing. Preston, growing annoyed, leaned forward. "Mr. Whitaker, do you understand what I'm telling you? You need to pay or you lose the farm. Do you have $8,962? Harold chewed on the inside of his cheek. Then he said, "I'll think on it." Preston laughed out loud. He actually laughed. "You'll think on it, Mr. Whitaker. With all due respect, this isn't 1958. The clock is running." Harold stood up. He adjusted his suspenders. He nodded once. And he walked out. Preston turned to his assistant and said, loud enough to carry, "Some of these old guys, I swear, they think sitting still is a strategy." The assistant did not laugh. She had worked at Riverbend for 22 years. She knew Harold Whitaker. And she was the one, 3 weeks later, who would quietly pull a 71-page file from the basement archive and hand it to a lawyer in Franklin without saying a word to anyone. Harold did not drive home angry. He drove home the way he always drove home, 42 miles an hour, both hands on the wheel, radio off, the windows cracked just enough to hear the gravel under the tires on the last half mile. He parked the truck by the barn. He walked up to the house. He took off his boots on the porch because Lorraine had made him promise 21 years ago that he would never walk across her kitchen floor in barn boots, and he had not broken that promise once since she died. He made a cup of coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table. And he made one phone call. His daughter, Rebecca, was 51 years old. She lived in Murfreesboro and worked as a nurse at the VA hospital there. She was a practical woman like her mother. When Harold told her what had happened, slowly, in the short sentences he used for things that mattered, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Daddy, the box in the closet." "I know," Harold said. "The green ones." "I know. Call Mr. Holly's." Harold said, "I'm going to." But before he did, he walked down the hallway to the closet where he kept his winter coats, reached up to the top shelf and brought down the green metal box his father had given him in the autumn of 1971. He sat on the edge of the bed where Lorraine had slept for 40 years. He opened the box. Inside were 53 receipts. The oldest one was dated January 17, 1972, signed by a man named Charles P. Henley, who had been the branch manager at Riverbend when Earl Whitaker first signed the mortgage. Beneath the receipts was the original mortgage document, 19 pages, held together with a rusting brass clip, and behind it, folded into a separate envelope marked in his father's handwriting with the words "For Harold, only when NEEDED," was a document of 7 additional pages. Harold had looked at those 7 pages exactly once in his life, the day his father died. He had not understood them then. He looked at them now. The first page was titled, Agricultural Heritage Preservation Addendum, Rider to Mortgage Number 11479, recorded March 14, 1972. The second page listed 3 clauses. The third clause was underlined in Earl Whittaker's hand. Harold read it slowly, one word at a time. Then he closed the envelope. He put the box on the kitchen table. He sat down and he thought about his father for a long time, about Earl Whittaker, who had come home from Korea in 1954 with a piece of shrapnel still lodged in his left hip, who had worked 29 years to own this land outright, who had sat on this porch in the autumn of 1971 and told his 20-year-old son, someday somebody's going to come for this land. And when they do, that paper is going to stand between you and ruin. Earl Whittaker had been dead for 53 years. But he had still managed to set a trap. And the man who had just walked into it was currently sitting in a charcoal suit in an office on Main Street in Columbia, Tennessee, smiling to himself about how easy it had been. Harold picked up the phone. He dialed a number he had not called in 11 years. Walter Hollis was 71 years old and had been practicing law in Franklin, Tennessee, since 1979. He had known Earl Whittaker. He had known Harold Whittaker's mother, Vivian, who had taught him piano when he was 9 years old. He had drawn up Lorraine's will in 1997. He had not taken a new client in 4 years, but when Harold's voice came through the phone on a Wednesday afternoon in September, Walter said only, "Bring it in Friday morning. I'll clear the day." Harold drove up to Franklin on Friday in the Ford. He carried the green box on the passenger seat, buckled into the seatbelt. Walter Hollis met him at the door. They did not shake hands, they had known each other too long for that. Walter poured 2 cups of coffee, black, and they sat down at the long oak table in the back room where, for 45 years, Walter had read documents that mattered. Harold slid the box across. Walter opened it. He read the receipts first, one by one, in silence. 53 of them. $47 every January for 53 years. $2,491 total, paid into a ledger that the bank had almost certainly forgotten existed. Then Walter opened the 1972 mortgage. Then he opened the addendum. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair, took off his reading glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose for what Harold counted as 41 seconds. "Harold," Walter said quietly, "do you know what this is?" "I know what my daddy said it was." "Do you know what your daddy did?" Harold said nothing. Walter opened the addendum to the 3rd page. His hand was steady, but his voice had gone very quiet, the way a man's voice goes quiet when he is looking at something rare. In 1971 and 72, Walter said, there was a brief window, 18 months maybe, where Tennessee Farm Credit, working with the state legislature, allowed small family farmers to attach a preservation rider to any new agricultural mortgage. The rider was voluntary. Most banks talked farmers out of it because it favored the borrower. Most farmers never heard of it. The program was killed in October of 1973. He tapped the page. "Your father signed this on March 14, 1972. Clause 3 is the one that matters." He read it aloud. "In the event of default, foreclosure, or forced sale of the subject property, the lender shall be required to provide the borrower, or lawful heir, with 180 days of written notice prior to any public auction. Failure to provide such notice shall render the sale void ab initio. Further, the borrower or lawful heir shall retain, for a period of 10 years following any such sale, the right of full redemption at the original 1972 principal value, and the lender shall forfeit all interest collected on the loan for the duration of its existence." Walter lowered the page. "Harold," he said, "they gave you 30 days, not 180. Harold nodded. "And they sold your land at auction?" Harold nodded again. Walter pulled out a legal pad and a pencil. He did the math slowly, the way a man does math when he wants to be sure. The auction sale was void. The land returned to Harold. The bank forfeited every penny of interest collected since 1972, which, at the original rate on the original principal, compounded over 52 years, came to $294,000. And because Meridian Capital had now publicly transferred title, they were exposed to breach of statutory notice damages under a 1977 Tennessee amendment that Walter Hollies, in a stroke of professional luck, had argued before the appellate court in 1994. Walter looked up. "Harold," he said, "this isn't a loss, this is a reversal." Harold chewed on the inside of his cheek. Then he said, "When do we go to court?" Walter smiled for the first time in an hour. "Tuesday," he said, "I'll file tomorrow." The hearing was set for Tuesday, October 15th at 9 a.m. in Courtroom 2 of the Maury County Chancery Court. Judge Eleanor Pritchett presided. She was 66 years old, had been on the bench for 19 years, and was known in 3 counties as the sort of judge who listened to every word and interrupted only when she had already decided. The courtroom was paneled in dark oak. The windows faced east, and the morning light came in at a low angle across the empty jury box. Preston Caldwell arrived at 8:47 in a fresh charcoal suit, flanked by 2 associates from a Nashville firm called Bentham, Core & Vance. His lead counsel was a man named Miles Core, 41 years old, who had a perfect tan and a watch that cost more than Harold's truck. Harold arrived at 8:51 in a clean blue work shirt and the same suspenders. Walter Hollies wore a gray suit that had been tailored in 1982. Miles Core spoke first. He spoke for 22 minutes. He cited Tennessee foreclosure statute. He cited the default clause. He cited the acceleration rider in Meridian's standard contract. He walked the judge through the missed payment of August, the notice issued in September, the auction in October. He used the phrase standard industry practice 9 times. He smiled at the judge twice. He concluded by stating that Mr. Whitaker's filing was, in his professional opinion, a nuisance claim brought by a rural council attempting to relitigate a lawful transaction. He sat down. Preston Caldwell leaned back in his chair and crossed his legs. Judge Pritchett turned to Walter Hollies. "Mr. Hollies," she said, "response." Walter stood up slowly. He did not open a folder, he did not clear his throat. He walked forward to the bench and handed Judge Pritchett 2 documents. "Your Honor," he said, "the 1972 mortgage, and the rider your clerk will find recorded in the Maury County Deed Book, Volume 84, page 391. The judge took the papers. She read them in silence for 4 minutes. Preston stopped smiling at the 3-minute mark. When Judge Pritchett looked up, she looked first at Miles Core, then at Preston Caldwell. "Counselor," she said, "were you aware of this addendum?" Miles Core opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Preston, opened it again. "Your Honor, our title search did not indicate." "Counselor, were you aware of this addendum?" Silence. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge's voice was quiet, cold, "your bank has held this mortgage since 1972. Your archive contains it. A clerk downstairs found it in 11 minutes this morning. Were you aware of this addendum?" Preston Caldwell did not answer. Judge Pritchett read the 3rd clause aloud, slowly, into the record. The court reporter's keys ticked in the silence between her words. When she finished, she looked down at Preston. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "did your institution provide Mr. Whitaker with 180 days of written notice?" Preston's voice, when it came, was smaller than he expected. "No, Your Honors." "How many days did you provide?" 30, Your Honors." "And the property has been sold?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Pritchett set the paper down. "The sale is void ab initio. Title reverts to Mr. Whitaker immediately. The bank will refund the auction purchaser in full from its own reserves. Pursuant to Clause 3 of the 1972 addendum, all interest collected on mortgage number 11,479 since March 14, 1972, which my clerk calculates at $294,118, is forfeited and shall be remitted to Mr. Whitaker within 30 days. The outstanding principal of $8,962 is dismissed as satisfied by the 53 annual preservation certificate payments, which this court finds constitute continuing consideration under the terms of the rider. She looked up. "Mr. Whitaker, you own your land free and clear. You are owed $294,000. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Harold Whitaker stood up. He adjusted his suspenders. He nodded once at the judge, at Walter, at the empty air in front of him, and he walked out of the courtroom without looking at Preston Caldwell at all. Preston Caldwell was suspended by Meridian Capital Partners on the following Monday. 11 days after the ruling, he was formally terminated. The firm issued a statement about a review of regional compliance procedures and a commitment to the agricultural communities we serve. The statement did not use Harold Whitaker's name. It did not use Preston Caldwell's name either. The BMW was repossessed in November. Preston moved back to Nashville and took a position with a smaller firm that did not do agricultural lending. He did not speak to the press. His perfect teeth did not smile quite the same way. Miles Corr was reprimanded by the Tennessee Bar for failure to conduct an adequate title review. He was not disbarred, but his firm no longer handled foreclosure work in Maury County or in the 3 counties surrounding it. Harold received the check from Meridian's legal escrow account on the 3rd of December. He drove to the bank, not Riverbend, but a credit union in Spring Hill, where he had held a small savings account since 1988 and deposited it himself. He did not celebrate. He did not tell anyone except Rebecca. But word got around. Walter Hollies received 41 phone calls in the 2 months that followed. Old farmers, widows, sons, and daughters of men who had signed mortgages in the 1970s. They came in carrying green metal boxes, shoeboxes, manila envelopes held shut with rubber bands. Walter did not take them all. He was 71 years old and he did not have the time. But he found 3 younger lawyers in Franklin and Columbia and Lewisburg, and he taught them what to look for. 8 other sales were voided in Tennessee in the following year. None of them made the Nashville papers. But in small towns across Middle Tennessee, in diners and feed stores and church parking lots, people talked. They talked about the old man in the work shirt. They talked about the $47 receipt. They talked about a father dead for 53 years who had still known how to protect his son. And Harold Whitaker drove home down the same gravel road he had driven for 54 years, 42 miles an hour, both hands on the wheel, the radio off. On the evening after the ruling, Harold Whitaker walked his land at sunset. He walked down from the house, past the barn, past the pond his father had dug in 1961, and up the long slow rise on the east side of the property where the old white oak stood. The tree was 190 years old by the best count of the county forester. Earl Whitaker had told Harold when Harold was 7 that the oak had been standing when Andrew Jackson rode through Maury County. Earl was buried beneath it. Lorraine was buried beside him. The headstones were plain gray granite. Earl's read, Earl J. Whitaker, 1928–1971, son and father. Lorraine's read, Lorraine M. Whitaker, 1949–2003, she loved this land. Harold stood between them for a long time. The light was low and gold across the pasture. A mockingbird was singing in the hedgerow. Somewhere down by the creek, a cow was calling her calf. Harold took off his cap. He held it in both hands. And he spoke quietly, the way a man speaks when he is speaking to someone who has been gone a long time. "You were right, Dad." The wind moved in the oak. "I kept the paper like you said, 53 Januaries, I didn't miss one." He paused. He was a young man, he didn't know, he thought I was just an old fool. Maybe I am, but the land stays, Dad. Becca's boy will have it, and his boy after, just like you said. He stood there a little longer. Then he put his cap back on and he walked slowly down the hill toward the house where the kitchen light was already on, because Rebecca had driven up from Murfreesboro to make him supper. Some men never live to see what they built. They plant trees they will never sit under. They sign papers they will never need. They whisper instructions to their sons on autumn porches, and then they die and the world moves on and the years pile up and the instructions are almost forgotten, almost but not quite. Because somewhere in a green metal box on the top shelf of a hall closet, the paper waits. And the $47 gets paid every January by a man who does not always understand why. Until the day the world comes for the land. And then he understands everything. Earl Whitaker did not live to see his son stand in a courtroom in Columbia, Tennessee, and watch a Vanderbilt MBA lose $803,000 of bank money in the space of 11 minutes. He did not live to see the judge lower the paper and rule from the bench. He did not live to see the white oak still standing on the hill in October of 2024, with both of their names beneath it and his grandson's grandson still to come. But he had planted the tree. He had signed the paper. He had told his son. And that in the end was enough. If stories like this still mean something to you, if you believe that quiet men kept promises and the slow, patient work of fathers still matters, subscribe to Acre Stories. We tell these stories because they deserve to be told. Next time, a Kentucky widow, a developer from Louisville, and a tin box of 1958 mineral rights her husband buried under the smokehouse the year before he died. You won't want to miss it.